Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of V Radio. If this is your first time checking this out, you can also check out my podcast, and you can also check out my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be discussing an article that I will link in the description, along with another article that is basically a copy of this article, which will make sense when I reveal it. So this is from the OCPA. It's an article in the higher education section. It says, OU coaches say players can be disciplined over politics. Now, some of you who are followers of my YouTube channel may remember that I shared a critical race theory, basically indoctrination session that was as part of a workshop for people, also, I guess, to try to educate people on how to put critical race theory and anti-racism stuff into their curriculums in colleges. And it just so happens that this is the exact same college that this incident happened at. So by OU, we're talking about Oklahoma University. So, OU coaches say players can be disciplined over politics, by Ray Carter, July 26, 2021. In their motion to dismiss a lawsuit filed by the former player Kylie McLaughlin, University of Oklahoma's women's volleyball coaches Lindsey Gray Walton and Kyle Walton say they were allowed to discipline players for political opinions because political disagreements can disrupt team unity. In their motion to dismiss McLaughlin's lawsuit, the coaches do not deny that they forced players to engage in political discussions that led to the alleged disruption of team unity. While the plaintiff was free to make bigoted statements, this is a quote, she was not free from the consequences of how her teammates perceived those statements, end quote. The Waltons' motion states, quote, the First Amendment cannot force her teammates to trust the plaintiff or desire to play with her. Consequently, the complaint makes clear that Coach Walton was within her rights to cultivate a winning team atmosphere by ensuring the players that trust each other would be on the court, end quote. The filing does not list any specific bigoted statements made by McLaughlin and does not deny key claims in McLaughlin's lawsuit. McLaughlin's lawsuit against OU and the Waltons says that during the spring 2020 COVID-19 shutdown, quote, the schedule for the OU women's volleyball team changed dramatically, end quote, as coaches for several months emphasized discussions about white privilege and social justice rather than coaching volleyball. During that period, members of the women's volleyball team were required to watch the documentary 13th on July 11, 2020. McLaughlin's lawsuit says Kyle Walton asked McLaughlin to, quote, give her opinion on the video, end quote. While saying slavery was wrong, McLaughlin said she also, quote, expressed her opinion toward the end of the video that it was slanted left and that it took some shots at what President Trump had said and compared it with the beatings of blacks from the 1960s, end quote. Within 4 days of the mandatory team discussion of the 13th, McLaughlin's lawsuit said coaches and teammates attacked her as a, quote, racist and a homophobe, end quote, during a meeting, and that Kyle Walton declared he was not sure I can coach you anymore. In her lawsuit, McLaughlin describes herself as a political conservative and Christian who expresses her Christian faith through word and deed. By October 6, 2020, the lawsuit said that McLaughlin received an email from the University of Oklahoma's, quote, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office that required her to be required her to be in an individual growth plan that involved a series of online training. Now, for those of you who watched my previous video where I basically play a leaked Zoom chat between these people, trying to teach teachers how to bring CRT into their classrooms, it was this same group, the University of Oklahoma's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. Anyway, so she was going to be required to be in an individual growth plan that involved a series of online training about homosexuality and unlearning classism, ableism, trans and homosexual negatives, and sexism. She was also forced to take courses on diversity and identities, communication, intraculture communications, active listening, and identity of privilege and race. McLaughlin's lawsuit states that no other member of the team was required to undergo an individual growth plan. During her time at OU, McLaughlin was selected as a captain of the women's varsity volleyball team for the first 2 years she was in the program, was first team All Big 12, and was selected a National Player of the Week. After the events of 2020, she ultimately opted to transfer to another university. McLaughlin was not alone in observing that the documentary 13th bashed Republicans. Some reviewers explicitly noted that the same when it was released, with one reviewer stating, "Equating Donald Trump supporters with Deep South lynch mobs isn't even in its most outlandish tactic," while another reviewer noted that the movie contrasts clips of former President Trump's speeches with law enforcement officials opening fire hoses on civil rights protesters in the 60s. In their motion to dismiss, the Waltons continue to portray McLaughlin a racial bigot despite not citing any specific examples, saying the coaches, quote, did not place a plaintiff in false light, and that McLaughlin's lawsuit fails to state anywhere defendants were aware that the plaintiff was in fact not a racist or homophobe. The coach's motion also states that McLaughlin's lawsuit makes clear that her teammates believe she was racist and homophobic. A separate motion to dismiss McLaughlin's lawsuit, filed by a board of regents for the University of Oklahoma, makes similar statements, calling McLaughlin's lawsuit an incremental rant related to difficult conversations that followed the murder of George Floyd and the nationwide discussions of social justice and inequality in America. The regent's motion says if McLaughlin has been labeled a racist, it's her own fault for publicly complaining about the treatment she received at OU. Plaintiff states that she is being branded a racist and a homophobe by the defendants, the regent's motion states. It was only after the complaint was filed that plaintiff received the attention complained about. In other words, plaintiff caused her own harm. The coaches also argue that athletes waive some First Amendment free speech rights as a condition of scholarship acceptance. Citing prior court cases, the filing states that student athletes must expect intrusions upon normal rights and privileges, and that one such restriction is the freedom of speech. I'm going to pause here for a second in my reading to remind all of you that this is basically the same crap that was in the CRT video that I brought out earlier. And it occurs to me that that video is not actually really reliant on the video element of it, so I might just download it and upload it as a podcast as well. But anyway, the point here is that in that video, one of the teachers instructs the rest of the teachers and the people attending that workshop on how they can claim that the Supreme Court upheld that the First Amendment does, or that free speech does not apply in the classroom. And that if you continue to say something that they don't agree with, then they can, at that point, report you and ask you to leave the classroom. And you get reported for violating the student code of conduct, which is a way you could get removed from a school if you keep doing it. In this instance, this person basically just said she didn't agree with one video, and as a result was labeled racist and homophobic and all that, and was told that she was going to have to take, all these classes, but anyway, let me go back to this and we'll get through it. But anyway, the coach's motion then compares the dispute with McLaughlin to an on-court disagreement over game tactics. Quote, as it relates to on-court conduct, for example, students are not at liberty to question the decisions of the coach via a First Amendment claim, the Walton's motion states. Because an athlete's political views may not be shared by other athletes, the expression of such views can be subject to punishment, the coach's motion argues, saying that a player's speech that potentially disrupts, distracts from, or hurts team unity, sportsmanship, or the cohesiveness of the team is subject to a coach's remedial action. In their filing, OU regents refer to an Oklahoma law protecting students' free speech rights as curiously broad. The Waltons also argue that as employees of a state university, they are entitled to qualified immunity. Now, here we go. So the idea is that employees of this university say that they're entitled to qualified immunity, which means that they can't be sued. They want qualified immunity, the same thing that they complain that cops have going for them, to be, to apply to, professors and coaches. Imagine that. Anyway, the regent's motion also declares that the U.S. District Court lacks subject matter jurisdiction because the university is an arm of the state of Oklahoma and immune from suit in a federal court based on 11th Amendment immunity, and that any charges made against the official acts of OU coaches is a suit against university's employees in their official capacity, and therefore simply a suit against the university. The Regent's motion also claims that McLaughlin can point to no conduct by the university or its officials in retaliation to an on-campus free expression. 3 attorneys are listed as representing both the Board of Regents and the coaches on the separate motions. In a response to the OU motion to dismiss, McLaughlin's attorney argues that the federal court is the proper venue to address a case involving free speech rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Insisting on a federal court to decide federal law claims is not an insignificant consideration, McLaughlin's response states. So now, before I go any further, I want to point out, because I'm sure that many of my really heavy left-leaning people who are watching this are going to just kind of blow this off and say, oh, this must be some right-wing rag. Well, hate to break it to you, but as my video viewers will now see, and I will just share with you people who are on my podcast, it just so turns out that this same article in a semi-truncated version appeared on the Progressive Party's website. Now, the Progressive Party is an attempt at making a third party, basically for people who think like, say Bernie Sanders. Now, they don't necessarily think like all the people who think like Bernie Sanders, because, for example, I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, and I think this is fucking horseshit. But anyway, yeah, the same article here is reprinted. It just doesn't, basically, if it doesn't like go all the way through it all, and then it says, change will never come without political participation, share this article. So on this for the Progressive Party to repost this kind of makes me wonder, like, do they think this is a victory? Is that this is good that you can discipline players because you don't like their politics? Meaning players at the college? So the idea is that they're trying to hide behind the idea that they should be allowed to tell, anybody who has a scholarship to these schools what they can and cannot say. And if you don't go along with what they're doing, if you don't agree with them, then they're going to make sure that you're thrown in re-education camps, which, mind you, they're not camps. I'm just using it as an example. Re-education camps is things that various communist and fascist dictatorships do to try to get people to be, basically back to correct think. It's the kind of things they did in 1984 to fix, thought crimes. And that's exactly what's going on here. When you couple this with some slides that have been circulated in critical race theory that I will actually be sharing pretty soon, they do things like label saying "Make America Great Again" as an example of overt racism. And that was part of the curriculum in Iowa schools. So they have their pyramids that they always use, and this one in particular had that listed. And the thing that really bothers me about this is that aside from the fact that nobody's ever really been able to convince me that Donald Trump is racist, I don't support Donald Trump, but I don't think that's one of his problems. There's too many stories from people who worked for him, who were people of color, that actually really enjoyed working for him and felt that they were treated very well. I think that anything that's not them, meaning the extreme left, is racist to them. That's when they throw what I call the shotgun of oppression at you. Basically, they fire off, well, you're racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynist, white supremacist, and they just, and see what sticks. So, and the fact that there are, literally like a whole, caucus called Blacks for Trump kind of points to the fact that, I've just never heard the guy say anything directly racist. Insinuating or pointing out that there are Mexican gangs that try to get across the border is not a racist issue. My Mexican friends will be the ones who will tell you why this is a problem. Because MS-13 and some of the gangs that come over here, the cartel and such, I did a video specifically about that because if you believe in abolishing the police, none of these abolished police people have given me a good answer for how they're going to handle it when the cartel shows up to basically fill the power vacuum. They don't have an answer for that, and it's usually because they don't really have an understanding of what organized crime is or what it looks like in the United States, and as compared, for example, to Mexico, where the cartels were so powerful that they were able to basically launch an armed assault on the government of Mexico to demand that El Chapo's son, who was at that point the major crime boss, be released. You got to imagine how powerful your criminal organizations are if they can literally launch an assault on the government of another country. And the president of Mexico had to intervene to get him out of there. But anyway, I'm going to get back to these points about what's relevant to this, which is that coaches should not be able to tell people what their politics are. Volleyball coaches shouldn't be making people take mandatory classes, which is what started all of this in the first place. And they don't deny that that's what started all of this in the first place. That they made their players of volleyball sit down and watch this crap, and when one of them didn't agree with it, and not even really in a nasty way, then they're pariah. They're excommunicated. You will either be re-indoctrinated or we will destroy you. That's how they treat it. And again, as I've said to many people before, it's not just that this is immoral or that it's wrong. It doesn't work. The only kind of people you're going to get to go along with this crap are the people who would have agreed with you to begin with. Nobody, if you know a real racist, sending them to critical race theory courses is not going to fix that. It's at the end of the day, they're just going to resent it and they're going to push back. Racism has to be disarmed like a bomb. You have to humanize people of color to those people until they abandon it and just lose interest. They have to stop being afraid. The problem is that these activists think it's their job to make people afraid, and that's going to get you the opposite reaction. The funny thing is that it didn't work for the Nazis and it didn't work for the Soviets either. It could work in the short term. You can get people to be quiet, but you can't get people to actually change their minds that way. You can sometimes succeed in brainwashing people on college campuses because it's the first time they're away from their parents, and their peer group will have a big, powerful effect on them. And that's, I guess, what they're seeking to do here. But in the end of the day, this is actually kind of chilling, and it goes along with that other video. I guess I'll just throw that in the description as well, that because it comes from the same college. And this notion that we can tell you what is and is not free speech, because that was the same presentation where they said, if they're trying to say they have free speech rights, have them read Ibram X. Kendi's When Free Speech Becomes Unfree Speech article, which is an article where this guy basically says, well, any speech that, is not saying the same things we are is unfree speech and should be banned. Again, this is a problem that's just going to keep getting worse. And I still meet people who are in denial that this is even happening. You get called a conspiracy theorist or whatever for even bringing it up. I just got into a long Twitter battle with somebody who's still claiming that CRT is not being taught in schools, which is interesting because they're the same people who are also saying that it should be. He said it must be taught in schools. It's really important. So anyway, I don't want to ramble. So thank you for tuning into this, and please share it. I'm definitely in a position where the algorithms don't like me. At the end of the day, I'm not monetized. I'm not interested in that aspect of things. I've found that monetization is kind of set up in such a way to create problems for you, like Brett Weinstein found out. He was half of his family income was taken from him when he got demonetized. So I don't even want to be dependent on this. I want this to continue to be about my convictions to bring the truth to people. And again, I also tell everybody who listens to this, you're probably not going to agree with everything I say. That's fine. I actually don't want an audience that agrees with everything I say. And if you want to debate me in the comments, as long as you're actually having a constructive exchange with me, I have no problem with that. So anyway, thanks for tuning in to V Radio, and I hope to I'm going to have some great guests on this week. Tomorrow I'll be interviewing Ben Stewart. He was the filmmaker behind Kymatica and Esoteric Agenda. He's been on my show many times before. He's a great activist journalist in his own right. And then the day after that, I will have none other than Daryl Davis, the man that I've been quoting this whole time, who is a black man who does an excellent job of fighting racism. He literally rescues KKK members from the cult that is the KKK. And he manages to bring people back from racism, and not just sort of racists, not people who just didn't like the Black Panther movie or maybe didn't like, anything, or maybe voted for Trump, but actual racists. National leaders of the KKK abandon that organization after they've spent time with Daryl. And that's a strategy that works. That's a strategy that would destroy racism. Thanks again.